The Biden administration, fearing a Republican wave in 2022, decided it was more important for your baby to starve than to ease the formula shortages. If you do not remember, back in 2024, or 2022 rather, there were formula shortages as one of the fallouts from COVID, and there was limited supply of baby formula in the nation. Abbott Labs, which is one of the biggest producers of baby formula in the country, had to shut down its manufacturing facility due to contamination in formula that got some kids sick. And one of the issues that came up is that there were formula production facilities abroad, but those formula production facilities abroad had big tariffs on them. So if you imported that formula, it would have driven up the cost artificially. Tangent. One of the big arguments for 2024 is the Trump idea to add tariffs to pretty much any product made not in this country, and that goes beyond China. Originally, it was just tariffs in China, but some economically illiterate people have tried to convince the Trump team, which has largely embraced the idea, to advance tariffs across the board as a way to fund the federal government. And the argument is that those other countries pay the tariffs. That is not how tariffs work. If you think that's how tariff works, you are a stupid person. The way tariffs work, and what the problem is with this baby formula shortage, is that you, the consumer, pay the tariff. What happens with a tariff is, let's say, $1,000 is added to the product because it's made outside of this country. That's the plan. I'm using $1,000, but the plan being advocated by economically illiterate people is that we will add tariffs not just to things made in China, but to things made abroad generally. And anything imported into this country will be at a higher price. Those countries don't pay the higher price. The business importing the product, the American business importing the product, pays the higher price and then raises the price to the consumer by that amount, so the consumer pays it. So if you raise, let's make it an easier thing, $10 per shirt coming from India. You raise the price of a shirt by $10 with a tariff. The import company has to pay that additional $10, and then the price of the shirt's going to go up by $10. The consumer will pay $10 more for that shirt. And the thinking is, well, maybe the consumer will find a shirt made in the United States that's cheaper, and they'll buy that shirt instead, thereby stimulating new manufacturing in the United States. The problem is the shirt used to be $5. Now it's $15. You can maybe manufacture the shirt in this country for $10. So all you're doing is saving $5, but you've still increased the price by $5. It's economically illiterate. You're forcing Americans into higher prices. The Biden administration was doing this with baby formula. The baby formula market in the United States collapsed, and there was a federal tariff on imported dairy products, including baby formula. This was the middle of campaign 2022, and formula shortages were a big campaign issue. The Biden administration, according to, it's a left-wing site, by the way, Pro Publica. Pro Publica is a left-wing site, objectively so, a left-wing site. The Biden administration sought ways to restock empty store shelves. Among the options was lifting steep tariffs on formula imported from other countries. But as White House lawyers drafted a proclamation to remove the import tax, one federal agency resisted: the Office of the United States Trade Representative. With supplies of baby formula following precipitously across the country after a major production plant shut down, staffers from the Trade Representative's office repeatedly argued against lifting the tariff on imports, citing in part a concern that it would raise, quote, lots of questions from domestic dairy producers, according to documents obtained by Pro Publica. Cow's milk is a primary ingredient for most baby formula, and the dairy industry has long supported protections for U.S. manufacturers. Quote, situation at retail appears to be a combination of transportation, shipping, and panic buying by consumers, not an issue of inadequate domestic production, wrote Julie Callahan, an official with the Trade Representative's office, in a May 11th email to an official with the National Security Council, which was helping coordinate the administration's response. The next day, she told colleagues, quote, I tried to convey to NSC in strong terms, very strong terms, yesterday, that removing tariffs for infant formula would not result in increased access to infant formula for U.S. consumers. The White House never released the proclamation, and the tariffs stayed in place. The tariffs stayed in place. It took an act of Congress, a literal act of Congress, to get rid of the tariff. The Biden administration, they didn't oppose it. The Biden administration wanted it to be a bipartisan thing. The Biden administration wanted to hold your child's life hostage to a bipartisan congressional deal instead of acting quickly and unilaterally. Because the Biden administration was afraid if it did it unilaterally, donors from the dairy industry might support the GOP in 2022. They were more concerned about donors to political campaigns than they were your children. A spokesperson for the Trade Representative's office has defended the Biden administration, saying, quote, it was committed to using all tools, including trade tools, to address the formula shortage and ensure American families were able to access infant formula. All tools except tariffs. They didn't want to lower the cost of importing formula into this country. They didn't want to get rid of that burden on families because of the politics of it. Now, the Trade Representative's office is not some fixed office. It's accountable to the President of the United States. The President can hire and fire the Trade Representative. The President does not have to listen to the Trade Representative. But the President's staff chose to listen to the Trade Representative staff about the political ramifications of getting rid of a tariff instead of listening to the parents who would have benefited by getting rid of the tariff. To remind you, Abbott Labs stopped formula production in Sturgis, Michigan, which had made 20% of formula sold in the U.S. 4 infants had fallen ill or died after drinking formula made there. Federal inspectors found bacteria contamination and safety protocols were off. By April, nearly a third of normally available formula products were out of stock. By late May, the number was 70%. People started panic buying. Many infants, I don't know if y'all know this or not, my wife and I, we couldn't use formula, or we couldn't breastfeed. My wife, when we first got married, had to have a double mastectomy. So breastfeeding was out for us. We had to use formula. And we switched, I think, from Enfamil to Similac. We settled on Similac because the Enfamil didn't settle with our kid. And we wound up going to Similac, and the transition, though, caused all sorts of problems. When you disrupt a child like that and change their formula, that diarrhea, throw up, it was gross. It was awful. Doctor told us we had to stick with it, though, and make that change. We did. People were having to go through that with their kids in 2022, switching formula brands constantly because of the short supplies. The problem here is that the tariffs on baby formula were so high that it messed with the ability to import. One of the reasons was because there are strict regulations on nutrition and safety in this country, but also extremely high tariffs. In fact, the United States is largely closed to baby formula imports because of the tariffs. Normally, 90% of baby formula is made in this country because of the tariffs. The Biden administration started flying formula in from Europe, but that formula was sold with a tariff. So they were taking the time to fly in formula from Europe, but they wouldn't get rid of the tariff. They wanted Congress to get rid of the tariff. It took 10 weeks for Congress to get rid of the tariff. In those 10 weeks, The Biden administration could have alleviated concerns and done it unilaterally, but they were afraid that if they did it themselves, that the dairy manufacturers in America might fund the Republicans in 2022. That's how coldly politically calculated this was. That's how calculated it was. Your kid was less important than campaign donations for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Your kid was less important. Think about that. Many of these same people are going to stay in office if Kamala Harris gets elected president. And they coldly calculated that your kid was less important than campaign donations. Screw your kid. They needed the money to stop Donald Trump and the Republicans. They were willing to sacrifice your kid. I mean, hell, should we be surprised? Look at Abortion Palooza 2024. They've got an abortion van at the Democratic National Convention, keeping a daily tracker on the number of abortions performed. They don't care about kids. This is the party of Moloch. They are willing to sacrifice your kids to advance their agenda. They're willing to sacrifice your kids to save the planet. They're willing to sacrifice your kids to save jobs. They're willing to sacrifice your kids for whatever they need to sacrifice your kids for. I mean, we've gone back to the days where they want to kill your kids at the altar of Moloch to generate rain to produce crops in the name of saving the planet from having too many kids to prevent global warming. It's remarkable, too, that the Department of Health and Human Services in the Biden administration was pushing for an end to the tariff. If you don't know, by the way, it's a 17% tariff, 17%. So whatever the price is of formula, add 17% to it. And the trade representative was able to undermine the Department of Health and Human Services, making that political argument to the White House. Who was in charge? Well, we know it wasn't Joe Biden. Was it Kamala Harris? Was it Kamala Harris? We know Joe Biden at this time in 2022 wasn't competent enough to be running the place. So was Kamala Harris calling the shots? Was it Kamala Harris who put political donations ahead of your kids? Who ultimately made the call? Who was in charge here? Was it Biden or was it Harris? The buck stops with one of them. We know it wasn't Biden. So it must have been Kamala Harris, who was afraid of the political ramifications of making it easier for you to find formula for your child in 2022. They can talk about joy and caring and freedom all they want. They made a political calculation that it was better for your child to starve so that they could get campaign cash.